Good evening, and welcome to Luscombe's Choice on Resonance 104.4 FM. The album featured this evening is Jimi Hendrix's 1967 debut album, Are You Experienced?, which was recently re-released on 180-gram audiophile vinyl by Universal Music Group. Recorded in London at Olympic Studios with The Experience, who were Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, and recorded by Chas Chandler. The album was engineered by Eddie Kramer, a legendary engineer who has worked with a litany of famous artists, including the Beatles, Stones, Led Zeppelin, and many others. He was kind enough to give me an interview. So this is what he had to say about the album. Can I just ask you a bit about Are You Experienced?
Never heard of it. No, just kidding.
Do you know if Hendrix moved to England to find a more appreciative audience?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. He was discovered in New York by Chas Chandler and then brought to London by him. And then, of course, England, what it was in 1966, being very receptive to blues and rock and his very unusual way of playing, he was an immediate star.
How did Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding come into the picture?
Well, they just auditioned. I guess Chas was auditioning musicians for the band, and there were a couple of other drummers, and Mitch won out, I think, by virtue of the fact that, A, he was the most compatible with Jimmy, and B, I think, his style of playing suited Jimmy to a T. The fact that he was a jazz drummer as well as a rock drummer, the fact that he had this marvelous independence in his playing and was able to propel Jimmy along. I think he was the only drummer I could think of that could even keep up with Jimmy. And Noel, of course, Noel came into the audition as a rhythm guitar player. That's what he was. And Chas said, well, can you play bass? He said, well, I'll give it a go. And he did, and of course he got the gig.
Was there any particular concept or sound that you wanted to achieve with the first Hendrix album?
Well, it wasn't so much what I wanted to achieve. It was really a question of hanging on by my fingernails, trying to make sure that I got something on tape that was really good. Because the concept really was Jimmy's, essentially, in terms of what was coming. See, I react to what was going on in the studio. The sounds that I came up with were dictated to largely by the artist, and that's what one looks for, is the artist to give you the lead. Then, once you've established what the artist wants, then you can tweak it and make it your own. So what I was able to do was to facilitate Jimmy's sounds and just try to enhance them and make them even more presentable in a sort of strong way. I mean, the first record, Are You Experienced?, which was such a revolutionary record, was a very hard-edged record. It was very tough.
Okay, well, were you using much equipment to create that particularly psychedelic sound on some of the tracks, or was a lot of that achieved by Hendrix and his, fairly remarkable guitar playing?
Well, the equipment was fairly primitive, if that's what you're referring to. We were only recording on 4 tracks, but we were able to be fairly innovative with the 4 tracks that we had at our disposal. We were able to record on 4 tracks and then bounce it down to another machine, each time doing a stereo mix, giving us 2 more tracks, and then bouncing it back up to the original 4-track machine. So from that perspective, we were able to gain a few extra tracks. We had to be very careful in the mixing process so that we didn't mess it up. The equipment was primitive, to say the least. I mean, we didn't have much. We had compression and EQ and reverb and delays, and that was it.
Would you say that, nonetheless, Olympic Studios was fairly advanced for its time?
Olympic Studios was the most advanced studio probably, certainly in the UK and possibly in the world at that time, because of the fact that they had a wonderful console. The actual recording console was very, very advanced. We didn't have the tracks. America had 8 tracks at that time. We only had 4, but we had better sounding consoles.
And do you think the decision to include some straight blues tracks alongside the more psychedelic tracks was an attempt to appeal to the more sort of blues receptive British crowd?
No, I don't think so. I think it was really a question of that's Jimmy's bread and butter. That's his core. That's his essence, is the blues. Mm. So not to even include it would be crazy. I mean, you think about Jimi Hendrix's music, it's based on the blues, so not to include it would be insane.
Mm. And what was Jimmy like to work with as a person and as an artist?
Jimmy was bloody marvelous. He was a genius, there's no question. And he was funny, he was sharp, he was together, and he was an absolute delight in the studio. We had so much fun. We laughed our way through most of the sessions.
So, how long did the album take to complete? Do you remember?
Well, he had started the album essentially by virtue of the fact that he had done the singles. You know, he had done "Wind Cries Mary." You know, of course, he had done "Hey Joe," and he'd done a couple of other singles, and so that was the basis of the album. And then Olympic opened in January of '67, and Jimmy and Chaz were not happy with the existing studios that they were recording at, and they heard about Olympic, and they came to us, and I was very fortunate to get the job, and then I recorded more tracks, overdubbed and worked on and finished the other stuff, and tweaked it up and mixed it, and there's the album. Probably took a couple of months.
Okay, and you know, in terms of, I mean, I know you said it was very much Jimmy's concept, but I mean, how much did Chaz as a producer bring to the sound of the album?
Well, I think Chaz in the beginning was an essential part of what Jimmy was doing, because you know, Jimmy lived with Chaz in the apartment, and Chaz was encouraging him to write more songs, and he was, I think, without Chaz, Jimmy wouldn't have been the big star. He would have eventually, but I'm saying Chaz was absolutely instrumental in helping Jimmy get to that next level.
Okay, excellent. And in terms of Jimmy's songwriting process, how much, I mean, say, of a long song like, say, Third Stone from the Sun, how much of that was mapped out in advance, and how much of it was free improvisation on the part of Mitchell and Hendrix?
Well, I think the whole thing was mapped out, including the improvisational parts. I mean, I think it was sketched out as exactly as it was, allowing for the improvisational sections. You know, the way that song was probably structured was Jimmy and Mitch and Chaz worked on the arrangements, and then when they were in the studio, they just said, okay, well, this is a section we're going to be jamming on, and let's take it out another 16 bars or 24 bars or whatever.
So were there several takes of songs with a particularly long jam session?
There were always many takes. I mean, sometimes Jimmy would get it in 2 takes. Sometimes it would take 22 or 30 takes. But
I mean, his improvisational sections in the different takes, would they vary enormously, or would they sound sort of?
Oh yeah, my God, Jimmy, there was no 2 solos were alike, of course. And I mean, you could take any one of 3 or 4 of the outtakes, and they would be marvelous.
Okay, fantastic. And would you class Are You Experienced as a psychedelic album per se, or not? Because I'm not sure if I would.
I'm not sure if I would either. I mean, I think it depends upon the listener and what state of mind they're in. Certainly, the perception, you know, from the public was that it was, but I'm not so sure. I think that would be up to the individual.
I mean, yes. I mean, the only reason I don't think of it as a psychedelic album, you know, is just because it seems so sort of cohesive, and it doesn't seem to be in any way. Like, I think Sgt. Pepper's is in some ways a sort of psychedelic statement. It seems to be more just somebody playing great music, you know, from the heart.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, Jimmy didn't do anything by half measures. I mean, and yes, it's definitely it's a great classic rock album that was a benchmark for hard